Have you ever felt the exact moment someone stopped seeing you the same way? Not because of one big mistake, not because of something obvious, but because something in your energy changed. Maybe it happened during a conversation, maybe during an argument, or maybe in one of those quiet moments where nothing was said out loud, yet somehow everything shifted. She still smiled, still responded, still acted normal, but deep down, you could feel it. The respect wasn't the same anymore. And most men never figure out why. They assume women lose attraction because of money, looks, status, or success. But that's rarely where it begins. In reality, women notice weakness in ways most men completely overlook. Tiny behaviors, emotional reactions, hesitation, the need to be reassured, the inability to stay grounded under pressure. And the dangerous part is, many of these habits feel normal while you're doing them. That's why so many men slowly lose respect without even realizing when it started. But Stoicism explains this better than almost anything else. Because Stoicism isn't just philosophy, it's awareness. It teaches you how human beings reveal themselves through emotion, behavior, and self-control. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that people are always reading your internal state, even when you say nothing at all. Especially women. Women pay attention to details most men ignore. Your tone when you speak, the way you react when challenged, how quickly you lose composure, whether your confidence disappears the moment tension enters the room. And once certain patterns repeat themselves, she begins forming a quiet conclusion about you, not consciously at first, but emotionally. She starts feeling that you're uncertain, reactive, dependent, easily shaken, in other words, weak. Now listen carefully because this is important. Weakness is not about being emotional. It's not about struggling. And it's definitely not about being perfect all the time. Real weakness shows up when a man has no control over himself, when his identity depends on external approval, when his emotions control his actions, when he abandons his values the moment he fears losing someone. That's the kind of weakness people can feel instantly. And once a woman senses that energy consistently, the entire dynamic changes. Her tone changes, her patience changes, the way she responds to you changes. Sometimes she won't even understand why she's pulling away. She just feels different around you. This is why Stoicism matters so much in modern relationships. It teaches you how to become emotionally solid instead of emotionally dependent. It teaches restraint instead of impulsiveness, clarity instead of insecurity. And most importantly, it teaches you how to stop leaking weakness without realizing it. Because the truth is, many men destroy attraction through behaviors they think are harmless. They over-explain, they chase reassurance, they panic during silence. They tolerate disrespect because they're afraid to lose connection. And every time they do it, they communicate something silently. I don't fully value myself. That's what women pick up on, not the words, the energy underneath them. Today, we're breaking down 7 behaviors women instantly associate with weakness in men, and more importantly, how Stoic principles help you reverse them before they quietly ruin your relationships, your confidence, and your sense of identity. And the first one is probably the most common of all, seeking validation. Because the moment a man constantly needs approval from other people, especially from women, he unconsciously gives away his power in ways he doesn't even notice at first. And women notice that almost immediately. Because when your self-worth depends on someone else's approval, you start behaving differently without even realizing it. You overthink your words, you seek reassurance. You become hyper-aware of every change in her mood, her tone, her attention. And slowly, your emotional center moves out of your control and into hers. That's the danger. A man who constantly needs validation begins abandoning himself piece by piece just to feel accepted, and women can feel that pressure almost immediately, not because they're trying to judge you, but because insecurity changes your entire presence. You stop acting naturally, you stop speaking freely. Everything becomes an attempt to avoid rejection. But Stoicism teaches something radically different. Your value cannot come from outside of you, not from praise, not from attention, not even from love. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He reminded himself constantly that strength begins in the mind, not in external circumstances, because the moment your peace depends on other people behaving a certain way, you become emotionally fragile, and fragile men are easily shaken. The strongest men walk into relationships already whole. They appreciate love, but they do not depend on it to feel worthy. That inner stability changes everything about the way they move through life. And that brings us to another behavior women instantly notice. Avoiding conflict. Now, this doesn't mean becoming aggressive or argumentative. Stoicism is not about domination, it's about courage. There's a massive difference, because many men confuse being agreeable with being emotionally strong. But they're not the same thing. A man who avoids every uncomfortable conversation eventually loses respect without understanding why. He stays silent when something bothers him. He swallows resentment to keep the peace. He says yes when he really means no. At first it seems harmless, but over time, something dangerous happens. He starts betraying his own boundaries. And the moment you repeatedly abandon your own standards to avoid tension, people begin feeling that weakness around you. Especially women. Because emotional safety does not come from a man who avoids pressure. It comes from a man who can handle pressure without collapsing under it. Stoicism teaches you to face discomfort directly, to remain calm in difficult conversations, to speak honestly without losing emotional control. Not every conflict needs anger. Sometimes real strength is simply the ability to stay grounded while telling the truth. And most men never learn that. Instead, they become emotionally reactive, which leads directly into the next sign. A reactive man is predictable. His mood changes with every inconvenience. One bad text ruins his entire day. A small disagreement turns into emotional chaos. Silence makes him anxious, criticism makes him defensive, and eventually people begin walking on eggshells around him. The problem is not emotion itself. The problem is lack of mastery over emotion. Stoicism constantly returns to this principle. Your reaction determines your strength. Epictetus taught that events themselves are neutral. What destroys most men is the meaning they attach to those events. And this is where attraction quietly disappears, because women are naturally drawn toward emotional steadiness, not perfection, not coldness, steadiness. A man who stays composed under stress creates a sense of stability around him, but a reactive man creates emotional exhaustion. One feels safe, the other feels unstable. And once emotional instability becomes your pattern, it begins affecting every part of your life, including your sense of purpose. This is another one most men underestimate. A man without direction slowly loses his presence. You can see it in the way he speaks, the way he carries himself, the way he drifts through life waiting for motivation instead of building discipline. And people notice when a man has stopped moving forward, especially women, because purpose creates energy, it creates focus. It gives a man depth beyond relationships, attention, or temporary emotions. Without purpose, men become consumed by distractions, validation, and emotional dependency. That's why Stoicism places so much importance on intentional living. Every day matters, every action matters, every habit shapes the man you become. When a man wakes up driven by something meaningful, his energy changes naturally. He becomes harder to manipulate emotionally because his life no longer revolves around external approval, and that certainty becomes magnetic. But there's another subtle behavior that quietly destroys respect, even faster than lack of purpose: indecision. Because the moment a man becomes afraid to choose, afraid to act, afraid to commit to anything with confidence, people start sensing uncertainty in everything he does. Because hesitation doesn't stay isolated to decisions. Eventually, it spreads into your relationships, your actions, your voice, even the way you carry yourself. A man who constantly doubts himself starts asking the world to decide for him. And over time, people begin trusting him less because he no longer trusts himself. Women notice that quickly, not because they expect perfection, but because confidence has a certain calmness to it. It doesn't need endless reassurance before acting. It accepts risk, it accepts uncertainty, and most importantly, it accepts responsibility for the outcome. Stoicism teaches that fear should never be the force controlling your choices. Reason should. A decisive man understands that mistakes are part of life. He knows not every decision will work in his favor, but he would rather move forward imperfectly than stay trapped in paralysis. That quiet certainty creates stability, and stability creates respect. But there's another trap many men fall into while trying to appear good. They become too agreeable, too available, too accommodating, too afraid to disappoint anyone. And at first, people praise that behavior. You seem easygoing, helpful, selfless, but underneath it, there's often something much darker happening. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of losing connection. So instead of expressing what they truly feel, many men start shaping their entire personality around keeping other people comfortable. They suppress boundaries, ignore disrespect, say yes when everything inside them wants to say no, and eventually, resentment starts building silently. This is why Stoicism never teaches weakness disguised as kindness. Real kindness has strength behind it. A Stoic man can be compassionate while still standing firm in his values. He does not sacrifice his self-respect to gain approval. He understands that boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity, and people feel that difference immediately, because there's nothing attractive about a man who abandons himself just to be liked. Then comes the deepest fear of all, loss. The fear that if you stop chasing, she'll leave. If you speak honestly, people will reject you. If you stop pleasing everyone, you'll end up alone. That fear controls more men than they realize. It's why they tolerate disrespect, why they cling to unhealthy relationships, why they stay emotionally attached to people who no longer value them. Fear of loss makes men emotionally weak because it places their entire sense of peace in someone else's hands. But Stoicism reminds us of something uncomfortable and liberating at the same time. Nothing in life is permanent. Not relationships, not status, not admiration. Not even the version of yourself you are today. And once you truly accept that, something changes inside you. You stop clinging so tightly. You stop operating from desperation. You begin showing up in life differently because your identity is no longer built around avoiding loss. It's built around maintaining your character regardless of what happens. That is real strength. Not pretending not to care. Not becoming cold. Not hiding emotion behind ego. Real strength is emotional discipline. It's the ability to remain grounded when life becomes uncertain, to hold your standards when emotions are high, to walk away from what destroys your peace, even when part of you wants to hold on. And this is where most men finally understand the deeper point behind all of this. Women are not just responding to your words, they are responding to your emotional state, your energy, your self-respect, your ability to stay centered under pressure. That's why weakness is rarely about money, looks, or status. It's about emotional instability, dependence, fear, the quiet abandonment of self. And the moment you begin correcting those patterns, everything around you starts changing. Not overnight, but gradually. You speak differently, you react differently, you stop chasing validation, you stop needing constant reassurance, you become calmer, clearer, harder to shake. And for the first time in a long time, you stop performing strength and actually begin building it. That's the real transformation Stoicism offers. Not an image, not manipulation, not control over other people, control over yourself. And when a man finally reaches that point, something interesting happens. He no longer needs to convince anyone of his value. People can feel it before he even says a word. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to Modern Stoic Mind. And remember, the strongest presence in any room is usually the man who has learned how to master himself in silence.